office, and I'm a International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist. So I work with trees, and I love to learn about trees. And like Kendall, I started off working first with wood. So I took all the woodworking classes I could, and in college I took a cabinet making class. And so in working with wood, I've learned how to make most of our furniture in our house, which is a great satisfaction for me. So I'm really delighted to hear that you still have woodworking classes in school and you have that opportunity. That's really cool. So to learn how to work with your hands and craft things for yourself rather than being reliant on buying stuff from a big box store or having to pay a furniture maker. So it's very satisfying when you can craft something. I'll show a picture of something that I did out of wood from my own woods. When I was in high school, when I was going to college, well, I was first told that I wasn't smart enough to go to college, and so I didn't. But then went sometime later, I wanted to actually study forestry, but ended up in other work, and so now that I'm retired from working actually as a pastor, I'm now working going back to my first love of working with woods and forestry. Right out of high school, I worked for a logging company, Tri-County Logging, out in Middlebury, and Indiana Wood Products, and I was their hardwood lumber inspector. So green wood that would come down through the sawmill after sawing logs would come to me, and I would saw a grade about 30 to 60,000 board feet of lumber a day. And so I have kind of that background of working for a logging company, for harvesting trees for wood, and then working as a lumber inspector. And then as a hobbyist, working with wood to build my own furniture, as I mentioned. And I've enjoyed lathe turning, which is a creative work with turning bowls and platters and things like that. So this experience of working with wood is something that I bring from a variety of perspectives, and most recently working with living trees and for their wood. So a basic question we ask is, what or where is wood from?
Trees.
Okay, what part of the tree?
The trunk.
The trunk, okay. And what else? We have the trunk as a main source of the tree, so the butt log. Okay, so larger diameter branches, okay. So that's what we're looking at right here, is the trunk of the tree. And if the tree is large enough, say for example, when I was out in Northern California in the redwoods, there was a large branch that fell off this tree that was over 6 feet in diameter and over 150 feet long. That branch by itself was larger than any tree in the state of Indiana, just the branch alone. And so you have the trunk, but then sometimes large branch parts that can be used. So what does wood do for the tree? When I think about the branches attached to the trunk, it's kind of like the scaffolding to help lift the tree as a plant to sunlight and give it a competitive advantage over other plants. And it's the woody structure, having the woody material of a tree that actually gives it a competitive advantage over other, say, herbaceous plants. And so lignin is the secret ingredient, or the secret to a tree's success along with other woody plants. It's that lignin in the wood fiber that provides the strength and stiffness that allows trees to rise above the competition and resist stresses and live long. And so that lignin is the critical thing. And then the sapwood in the trunk and branches is what takes the water up, water and nutrients, and then the photosynthesis in the leaves that produces the sugars or the carbohydrates that comes down, and we'll see that in just a moment, through the phloem. And it's the sapwood that really supports the tree's weight. It stores materials and it defends the tree against decay and diseases. And then, you know, if you're looking at like this large sycamore slab here, you can find growth rings. And so you all probably know about annual growth rings, like in this piece of mulberry, you can see the annual growth rings. And so how often is a growth ring put on a year?
Once.
Just one, right? So annual. And depending what tree it is, so if you go out to Southern California, and I'll show a picture of the Great Basin bristlecone pine, they grow so slow that it takes 300 growth rings to produce an inch. So you can't see the annual rings unless you're looking through a microscope. That's how slow these really cool trees grow. And then the vessels just beneath the bark, as I mentioned, is what transports the materials that the tree produces. And the bark helps protect this kind of plumbing system from fire and weather and animals. Now, then we also have wood not only in the trunk and branches, but beneath the ground. The roots are made up of woody material, and the work of the roots are very important. Let me back up here. Tell me, what are the function of roots? What can you tell me about what roots do as the woody structure for the tree?
They bring in nutrients from the ground to keep it so alive.
Okay, so they're drawing nutrients from the ground, transporting up into the tree, and what else do the roots transport along with nutrients?
Water.
Water, so water and nutrients. What else do the roots do for the tree, again, as the underground woody part?
They keep it from falling over.
Okay, so it provides stability. It anchors the tree, keep it from falling over. So if you look out here, from between here and Wreath, we have to the river, we have low ground, and because of the water in the soil, it's saturated. The roots grow very shallow. That's why, for example, if you drive along Plymouth Avenue here, you'll see a lot of uprooted trees because the roots aren't very deep. And this is often what happens, like with storms and so forth, with trees in wet ground. They don't have that support. What's another function of tree roots? What can you tell me? They support water, nutrients, they provide anchorage, and what else? So in the winter time, the sugars from the tree, the food that the leaves produce, where are the sugars or the carbohydrates stored? The tree's food.
The roots.
The roots, yeah. So the roots are where they're stored. And another thing that's really interesting about tree roots is kind of where the tree's memory is at. And so more recent science suggests that trees, actually as intelligent beings, they're not quite like ants that can move around and have that kind of intelligence, but trees are intelligent in the fact that they communicate with each other, they coordinate efforts, but science is now showing that trees remember with their roots. So we're looking at these anchor trees in storms, and their water nutrients, conduct resources, and store energy. And they also produce the growth regulators, the hormones that actually direct the tree's growth. And then the roots grow where there's water, oxygen, and nutrients, where that's abundant, usually in the first top foot of soil, and that's important. So for the reason this is so important and relevant is when you're seeing, for example, at the Goshen Public Library right now, the excavation that's happening with the construction project, they're cutting right up to the trees. And because the trees, the roots spread much further, 2 to 3 times the height of the tree, so many of those roots are being damaged. We'll wait and see what happens to those trees. And that's why for certain tree species, it's very important to protect their roots as woody material. Like beech or white oak, they're very sensitive. So just knowing these things about trees can help you know how to treat them, whether it's construction or and we'll look at a slide here about damage to the side of a tree. Excuse me. Here's a honey mesquite tree in Death Valley. where it gets over 130 degrees. The day I took this picture, it was only 122 degrees. In Death Valley, they get less than 2 inches of water a year. It's pure sand and gravel, 120 to 30 degrees. How can a tree grow in this environment? Question.
Oh yes, how often are roots used in lumber? I just wanted to know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And actually more and more, so I refer to redwoods, for example, in California. So you've had these large old growth redwoods that have been harvested. Because redwood is so rot resistant, people now recognize the value of stump wood. And they're going into the excavators and they're actually harvesting, digging up these stumps from the soil.
Yeah.
And they'll trailer them out, and then they'll saw slabs, or they can make really funky furniture. So they'll saw the top of it, and then you'll have the root structure that can be worked with. So they'll dig up these large woody masses of these like redwood, and then they'll take them in the commercial water sprayers, hose all the soil and gravel out, and they can be really funky things. And there's one place in Ohio where you can go and buy redwood root slab. And you have a lot of character in it, and so it's a very beautiful wood, but very costly if you can imagine.
Yeah, I don't know, because that would take a lot of effort to do stuff with the roots. So I was just curious if it was ever used at all. Thank you.
Or, for example, gun stocks, a real high-end, like rifles and shotguns, are often made with the from walnut that comes from very low, and you want to get down in their root area because you have all this high amount of figured wood that makes it so valuable. So my son, who has a live edge furniture business, sometimes we're taking down a large walnut tree, we'll excavate maybe a foot below grade, dig all the soil away, then come back with a power washer, power wash everything, and then make that chainsaw cut a foot below ground to get all that additional wood and highly figured like that. But yeah, that's an interesting question. So anyway, the question is, so how does a tree in such a hot area with so little water and sand grow? Well, by having very deep roots. They have found that roots from a honey mesquite tree can go down over 190 feet. That's pretty crazy, I think. And there's a tree in South Africa, they've measured roots going down over 400 feet to actually get at water. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, that roots go to great lengths to reach what the tree requires. And this for me is something of a parable or a picture of what we also as humans need, to think that if we want to be strong and stable and we want to kind of thrive in life, that we're rooted in something. And so I just kind of invite you to think about what trees may suggest by their own character or their physiology. There are characteristics like this, and thinking about rooted in something that is life-giving and strength-giving to you. And then here is a diagram. When we think about our question today, what is wood? The wood is basically everything from within, behind the bark and the cork, secondary cork cambium is what the xylem through the heartwood. And so this is kind of wood as we think about. And so we have the lighter wood is the sapwood, and the darker wood is often the so-called heartwood. And some trees will have a lot of heartwood, where others will have very little, and it varies from tree to tree, not just between species. And then the growth rings I mentioned is basically the amount of wood that is put on each year. The lighter color is what grows in the early season, and that dark line that we often count That's the late wood that is put on in the fall. And then what's really important in a tree is the cambium, because outside of the cambium, the tree's cambium is what produces growth on the inside with the sapwood, and on the outside the phloem. And this carries the sugars down, and the sapwood carries the water and nutrients up. And then, so that what's really important here is to recognize that the most sensitive part of a tree's wood is right behind the bark. And why is that important? Back up here. Right here. So what can you tell me, what are you seeing right now?
It looks like it's rotting.
Something is rotting. Okay, so you see root at the base of each of these trees. What caused this?
The roots are probably unhealthy.
Pardon me?
The roots are probably unhealthy.
The roots may be unhealthy, and then why might they be unhealthy? They've been damaged. What has caused this damage?
Storm.
We see this all over in urban areas. So we talk about
Bees.
Erosion.
not erosion, not bees,
Somebody
not ants, not.
Did somebody say
Mealworms.
What did you say?
Oh,
Lawnmower, yes. This is kind of lawnmower damage, or it might be string trimmer. Okay, Andrew?
For real?
Pardon me?
How did it? Oh, never mind.
Yeah, so you have a mower operator, and the biggest threat to a tree in urban landscapes is a man on the mower. And I say a man on the mower because, in my opinion, women are more careful about trees. But a man on a mower, because it was zipping around with a zero radius mower, where you can get real tight. You have the deck of the mower scraping around the tree, or a string trimmer. So in this case here, this was a tree that was down in Rogers Park, and because there was so much decay around that tree had to be removed. And so these become a high-risk tree because this is now decaying from this damage, and it's really sad because this is preventable. So if a mower operator would understand that when they're going around, buzzing around a tree, or operating a string trimmer, cutting grass away from the tree, and they're cutting through the bark, they're cutting into the cambium, that first kind of woody layer that is causing this severe damage that can actually kill a tree. So we see a lot of this kind of. We see it all over town, and at each tree, there'll be a couple to several $100s invested in every tree at the time of planting. The tree cost, the installation, the initial care, all of it is lost because someone doesn't understand what happens when they're cutting into that woody tissue just behind the bark. So I was watching a guy mowing a few months ago, and he was buzzing around the tree, and he was doing some damage, and so I stopped and I asked him, I said, I'm just observing how you're mowing, the damage you're causing. He kind of blew me off. Well, it'll just simply grow back. You'll be fine. I said, actually, it won't. The tree has the ability called compartmentalize to close around the wood, but this kind of damage it does not. When you're buzzing around like this, and it damages all that, the tree's vessels that are carrying the water and nutrients up, and what's being carried down? The phloem carries what down? The sugar or the carbohydrates, the tree's food, okay? So that's why knowing some of these things really helps to provide better care to trees. And so I'm going to back up and show you this on sapwood and heartwood. Once again, mentioning that the sapwood is that outer lighter color. That's what's alive, okay? And that's what carries the water nutrients. The heartwood, by contrast, is now wood cells that have died, and they're no longer living, they're no longer transporting cells, and so the tree dumps some of kind of cast-off chemicals into that. And those chemicals, they're called extractives, actually make the heartwood more decay resistant. So the implication of this, why this is important, is that when you're doing pruning work on trees, we want to prune before heartwood sets in, and that's why we prune branches that are smaller than 4 inches, because the more heartwood that's there, I'm sorry, I just turned around. The sapwood has the ability to compartmentalize, the heartwood does not, even though the heartwood is more rot resistant to some extent. And so it's important to be able to make your pruning cuts with very little heartwood. And I mentioned that lignin, if you kind of want to just go a little more kind of scientific here, I mentioned that's that secret to the tree's success, and that's what's kind of in this these kind of brownish structures around the tree's fiber. Anyway, if you just want to kind of see what that looks like, if you could actually blow up the cells of wood, this is what you would see. And then we want to think about porosity of tree rings. And so we have a range of ring porous, semi-ring porous, semi-diffuse porous, and diffuse porous. Ring porous trees are ones that have wide vessels, and so that have these growth rings, just very distinct growth rings, and which are formed again by the early wood, which is typically lighter, and the darker wood in the later season. And as you move across here, we get to diffuse porous trees. Those trees, they don't have as distinct annual growth rates that can be harder to see. Diffuse porous trees are ones that grow typically more around wetter, moister soils because they're drawn up more through the year. Whereas the ring porous, like oaks and so forth, they can draw water faster, and you'll find that they're it's drier soils. So that ring, just by definition here, the ring porous, the vessels or the pores are formed early. And this creates the rings. The large early wood vessels conducts lots of water in the spring. The late wood has those dense fibers for strength. And typical species that have the ring porous woods, like this, oak, ash, elm, and hickory. And so an example of this is white oak. So this is a white oak here. And the white oak, if you look at the end grain, you'll not only see the annual growth rings, but you'll also see what's called tylosis. That's kind of the material that fills the vessels. That's why white oak is used for whiskey production. So the whiskey barrels are made from white oak because of the tylosis. And then the flavors that are taken on in the process. And so white oak, this is our most valuable wood ecologically, or valuable tree, and is the second most valuable tree economically. It's second to walnut. And white oak right now is declining as a tree because the wood is so popular, especially if you get a rift cut or a quarter sawn white oak, which is really beautiful. I replaced all the carpet in my house, my main floor, with this 3/4 inch solid white oak because it's really strong and stable and very hard. So I'm contributing to oak trees decline by using so much white oak that's in our house. But it's a great wood, and so this is one tree that we need to help recover. You had a question?
Would you mean economically?
Just in terms of the value of, like, say, a white oak log, is much greater than all other wood species with the exception of walnut. So, for example, I mentioned up at Vista, they're taking down a very large red oak tree. Red oak has become more of a pinkish, kind of a reddish color compared to white oak, and it has very little demand, and so that wood unfortunately has really low value. And so that tree, even though it's probably a veneer quality tree, the highest quality by grade, will still go to a pallet shop. It won't even go to a grade mill because there's no demand or call for red oak right now, which is really sad. And so we're talking here again, ring porous and then diffuse porous, which, as you saw in the previous picture, where the vessels are more evenly distributed. And this has water conduction more evenly through the growing season. Maple, birch, poplar, cherry to a lesser extent is just associated. Sugar maple is a good example. It has very fine, tight grain, very smooth, uniform look. Now, why is this important to know ring porous versus diffuse porous? So, for example, today I spent most of the morning killing trees. Now, why would I want to kill trees? So, in the woods that I manage at Pathways Retreat here in Goshen, I have an overabundance of cherry trees. They're so abundant that I have a pest called lesser peachbark borer. I have so many trees that are overpopulated, so my stand of cherry is stressed. The trees are sick with this particular pest, and they're declining, and that pest is spreading. So I need to kill a lot of cherry trees. And so I know, okay, that a cherry tree is diffuse porous, so when I'm taking my chainsaw and I'm girdling it, and a girdle is simply cutting all around the tree to cut all of those vessels that are carrying the water and the nutrients up and the carbohydrates, the food down through the phloem. I need to sever those vessels, and I have to cut in with my chainsaw a little deeper than if I were cutting an oak tree. I just need to cut through just maybe a 1/4 inch, into the wood to sever those vessels. And so, so it informs how deep, I say, a chainsaw cut that I make to effectively kill or deaden the tree. And the other reason I'm taking out a lot of cherry trees, I'm going to harvest a bunch of cherry this winter to create openings for white oak trees that I'm planting. So the city has a program where we're getting trees out to not-for-profits and businesses, and so I'm getting some of those trees to plant to help this species recover, because this is declining. It's very important ecologically to get this back up. There's no tree that supports more wildlife than a white oak because of the acorns and the tree structure. Any questions about this so far? Okay, and then the wood varies by species, and so trees have very different characteristics by the way they grow. And so I just want to show a few trees to give us an idea. So can anyone identify this massive tree?
Oak.
And this tree is not found in Indiana. It's only found in California and Oregon and Washington.
Giant.
Palm tree.
Palm tree. Okay, yeah, it's a Mexican palm tree. No, this is a Mexican palm tree. My son in California's got a lot of Mexican palms. If this is not a Mexican palm, this is
Giant redwood.
a giant redwood. Okay,
So,
and this actually is the largest redwood. This is General Sherman.
you got a name?
Yeah. So and this here, it has six. Get this. We talk about wood inside a tree. This tree has over 630,000 board feet of wood. Now, so get your mind around this. If you would take and you would saw this tree into 1 by 12 boards, so an inch thick, a foot wide, it would make 119 miles long of wood.
That's like around the world.
just to get an idea about how much wood can be in one of these trees. So when a tree like this is harvested, they'll typically drop other trees and a canopy, and so when the tree comes down, it'll hit like a cushion. And these are old-growth trees that I don't think should be harvested at all, that should be protected. There's a place for harvesting smaller trees, but old-growth trees like this should be protected, and they'll make a big bed of branches, because if they don't, the tree comes crashing down. Sometimes they just explode, and then the whole tree's value for wood is ruined. You have a question?
Does that tree have a name?
That is a
Home tree.
now it's an exotic tree. It's a very popular indoor tree, and I'm forgetting the name of that. Is that
Pine tree?
it is in the pine family, the Pinus family, but I can't tell you what it is.
So, real quick, so the general term it's considered a sequoia, or sequoia is a type of redwood tree?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the sequoia and this is actually technically it's a coast redwood, and the sequoia are both in the sequoia family. Yeah, they're two different species. And then this here is the world's largest tree in terms of clonal tree. So this particular tree is called Pando. It takes up 105 acres in Utah. It takes up 105 acres, and it consists of 47,000 tree stems. So they're all interconnected. It's all one root system.
That's all one root system?
Yeah, all these trees are connected to one root. They're identical DNA.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so this is what we're looking at here is 105 acres of a single tree growing through 47,000 stems. Okay, and so you can take a sample of this wood, look at its DNA, and to distinguish it from the next quaking aspen over outside this wood, this woods here. So this is really cool, and the root stock on this is 9,000 years old.
Oh,
So this tree goes back 9,000 years old.
that's crazy.
Isn't that cool?
It's really tall.
So think again. This is what kind of wood does for a tree. It is kind of advantage, and so trees are incredibly remarkable.
How do super large root systems like this allow for other plants? Like I understand that the roots aren't going to be taking everything, but I would think something that massive would need a lot of energy, and I would think that would.
Yeah, it largely goes to so for example, what we have here, we have some juniper species that are evergreen, and we have some manzanita shrubs in here. They have different root depths, and so they're like, if you look out here in the prairie, for example, the grasses out there, the forbs or wildflowers, they learn how to kind of cooperate and kind of get along and growing at different depths and spread, and they'll just occupy all the soil profile. And so these trees and shrubs and then herbaceous or non-woody plants, they just learn how to kind of get along. And then what's really cool is that between certain tree species, the roots will graft. So their woody structures will grow together through fungi or mycorrhizal fungi connections. And that's how trees can communicate, so they can send messages. So for example, in Africa, and I've had a chance to see a lot of acacia trees in Africa, when giraffes are coming and feeding on the trees can send messages through aerosols, like they let out these scents, where other tree species, for example, oaks, they'll send chemical and electrical messages in their interconnected root systems. So it actually becomes a wood wide web, as it's called, where trees can communicate to say, hey, there's something feeding on us, and then the trees will release certain chemicals. So those giraffes don't like the tree, they find it distasteful, and they'll move on to another one. So it's really cool about how trees also then communicate through their woody structures.
So it's like a plant version of mycelium, basically.
Yeah. Well, technically, the mycelium of the fungi, it's neither a plant or animal. It's in its own kingdom. Yeah. So fungi are neither plants or animals. They're in a class by themselves. When I was in high school, I was taught there are only two kingdoms, plants or animals. And now it's 5 to 7, depending on how you count, how many kingdoms. That's how complex things are. And then here, this is a cool tree. This is a ficus tree. Okay, you can see me standing here. So this tree
I
is.
couldn't even see you. I couldn't even.
Yeah, I'm kind of camouflaged in there. Okay. Yeah, that's me there, so you get a sense of how wide this tree. Now in this case here, most of the wood you see are actually roots. The roots drop out of the trees and they hit the ground and they take root and then they build up. So these trees can be extremely wide. There's one in India that is, I forget how many acres wide, a single stem. And the roots come down, it's kind of like they're on a pillar, just anchoring the tree and supporting the tree. So this is pretty cool, but this tree is not going to provide lumber like this. But that's a pretty amazing structure. And then here's a tree in Asia. The roots of the trees that grow over top the temples.
That's cool.
Yeah, isn't that cool? And so eventually when these old temples in Asia are falling in the ruins, what's left are, look at that tree growing over this temple. So again, that's really cool wood. Roots that are actually overtaking, showing how incredibly resilient trees are. They can actually grow in that kind of environment. Isn't that cool or what?
That is cool.
And then here's, this is actually a picture like Hyperion. This is the tallest tree in the world that is just under 400 feet. That's the equivalent of a 17-story building. They keep that tree's location a secret because they don't want sport climbers to be climbing up into the tree. And so but this is an example of a coast redwood that is very tall. This is over 300 and some feet. Now the question is, how can a tree grow that large?
I think it's pretty average.
And this is really a kind of an interesting thing that goes to another property of wood. We talked about how the tree's wood draws up through its vessels the water and nutrients, right? Well, how does it pull the water up so high?
Because it like
It's like a straw.
And it's like a straw, that's right, okay? So how does a straw work?
You see stuff like that.
With suction, right? Well, who's doing the suction?
The tree.
Okay, what part of the tree is providing the suction through the vessels that are like straws?
the leaves.
The leaves. So as the leaves are giving off, what do the leaves give off?
Oxygen.
They're giving off oxygen as part of their photosynthesis and water.
H2O.
So the water it's called evapotranspiration. It's kind of being drawn up through the leaves, and that creates a vacuum to suck up. But to suck up nearly 400 feet is more than what a vacuum pressure can do. But there's also what's called tension. So it's kind of, you see at the top of a glass how the water goes above the rim.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a kind of tension force. So between suction and tension, that's how a tree can grow. And scientists think about 400 feet is the maximum that a tree can grow when you combine those forces. That's a long 400 feet. Imagine the sucking power to pull water up that high as a pump.
Has to be a lot.
It's a lot. So for example, last week I was in Utah and I was talking to a guy who sets up irrigation systems for potato farms. And he was telling me that they have pumps to go down up to 500 feet, and it takes a 750 horsepower electric motor. And it takes 880 volts. That's a lot of electricity to run one of these big electric motors with the kind of suction power to pull that up. And here, this is what's happening all the time with trees. And just to give you an idea, if you've not seen the redwoods personally, you can see recreational climber or scientist, and then you can see a person down by the bottom. Just to give you an idea,
And that's a person?
that's a person down there at the bottom.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, so hopefully sometime you'll have the opportunity to see some of the most impressive wood in the world by going and seeing these redwoods and seeing, again, what is lignin? That's that secret to this tree's success, to be able to rise above the competition, because plants compete for sunlight, and who's going to be the winner here? You know, growing that tall is going to be the tree. Here's the widest tree in the world. This is a Montezuma cypress. It's 119 feet around and 38 feet across. That's a single tree here. And see how the people at the base, to give you an idea, another funky wood. Here's the famous live oak down in South Carolina called the angel oak. Isn't that pretty cool? Look at the woody structure. Now, in this case here, there's very little valuable wood. So from a logging perspective, it's not worth coming in to harvest this tree. And so cool trees are cool because they've been spared the logger's axe or chainsaw, because this is too short of a trunk that renders this tree more worthless. But isn't that amazing? And that's a real sculpture. And then here's the baobab trees of Africa. Okay, let's look at this. Again, this is what wood can do. In this case here,
Is that a rock?
this is huh?
That's a tree.
That's a tree?
That's a tree, yeah.
It is like rock.
Yeah. The bark is kind of rock-like in appearance, but in this case here, this tree has an amazing capacity with its wood to store lots of water. And then here comes the bristlecone pine. This is from Schulman Grove in Southern California that I visited. And these are the oldest trees in the world. We have the clonal tree like Panda that goes back 9,000. This tree here, these go back 5,000 years. So these trees were actually living at the time of the Great Pyramids. Or so if you're from a faith perspective, before Abraham and Sarah went out, were called to follow after the call, these trees were in the landscape before the pyramids. And Abraham and Sarah. Isn't that wild? And once again, it's because of their wood. They grow very, very slow. They're dense and very resinous, and so they're extremely rot resistant. And so let's show you some of the pictures here. Because they're between 9,000 and 11,000 feet up in the mountains, they're exposed to a lot of harsh winds, sand that blows in the wind. And so look how this wood takes on its own interesting character because of the exposure that has the elements. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
These are like natural pieces of art. And there's something of a lesson here for me that these trees are considered extremophiles. Extremophiles, there's a new word for you. Living things that have the ability to persist and endure the most adverse living conditions. They're so high in their factor of resilience that they can live so long. And this is something I think is can speak to us too, of our remarkable ability to be resilient, to be able to endure a lot of hardships. And a lot of times it's the hardships in our life that put on character like this in wood. So just look at the way this is bent just by the life forces up on the side of the mountain. So these are really cool. And so and these trees are only, there are no trees in this grove that are higher than the ceiling and that are 4,000 to 5,000 years old, that are slow growing. And then the other thing that determines a tree's woody structure is not only the species of tree, but where it was grown. So for example, these trees are the same species, a white oak, Quercus alba. And so this tree on the left is grown in the woods. Because it's grown in the woods, what does that tree have to be able to adjust to for what it needs? So what does a tree need besides water and nutrients?
Sunlight.
Sunlight, okay? So if a tree is growing in a forest, what does it need to do?
It needs to grow higher so it can beat other trees.
Yep, it needs to grow higher to beat or compete with other trees. So when a tree is grown in the shade, the tree is forced to grow more upright along a single trunk, whereas an open-grown tree like this white oak, or if you're outside this parking lot, and you go right out here where there's a giant white oak with chimes hanging from it, it's like this one here because it's open-grown. It has all the sunlight it needs, so it'll grow as wide as it's tall. And so if we're thinking about growing trees for wood, trees are typically grown more in denser areas. So for example, I'm coordinating a campaign where we're replanting trees, like in fields, trying to reproduce forests, and we'll plant them every 8 feet, 8 by 8 spacing, or 681 trees an acre. But if you want more ecological value and produce more nuts, if you make it wider spacing, like 20 by 20, to get more sunlight, and they grow that more funky look that I like. So it all depends on how you want a tree to grow, the kind of wood that you want to produce. And so real quickly here as we close, I want to think about what good is wood. So what good is wood? How would you answer that?
Like the value?
Yeah. So what are some of the values of wood? What are some things that we get from trees? Let's see if we can quickly name off how many goods or things we get from trees.
Houses.
Okay, houses from the wood as lumber. What else?
Furniture.
Okay, furniture, again, made from
Oh,
lumber.
furniture.
Okay,
Flower.
We just said that.
firewood, okay. Like we heat our house with firewood.
Rooms.
Okay, but,
Houses.
okay.
Another
So we're naming kind of lumber products, but chocolate, coffee,
Paper.
medicines, like I had chemotherapy for cancer. And that chemotherapy originally came from the Pacific yew tree. Aspirin that you take, it comes from the salix, the willow tree. And so there are many, many things. Or think about fruit, nuts, all these things that we easily enjoy. But look around here, you're right. So we see all this lumber, whether it's maple or poplar, and then behind the sheetrock, we have spruce pine for 2x4s or 2x6, and then frame like across here. And wood, pound for pound, is way stronger than steel. You know, and it's a sustainable product. Look at this church here. This church goes back to the 18th century. From the 1700s, there's not a wood or a metal fastener. This is 100% wood with no nails, no screws, no metal fasteners. Just to show you the kind of what can be accomplished with just pure wood. Or here's a framing for a house, again, a picture of wood. Here's a bedroom set that I made from cherry trees for my wood. I designed and built this myself, and so it was really satisfying to take it from a standing tree all the way to furniture, this solid black cherry set. Or to think about other things we get from wood besides lumber, to think about instruments, in the case here, piano and recorders, violin, guitar. If you go to downtown for wood-fired pizza, what's that take? It's wood. Or campfires, all of our paper products. And every day when you're using toilet paper, you're using a tree product, and that's basically grinding up all the wood, making a pulp out of it. And so that's kind of pulp wood. Again, all of our reading materials come from pulp wood. And here's this a real interesting one, cork. The cork actually comes from between the wood and the bark. And again, that's a tree product. And just a quick show of just a variety of different hardwoods for furniture grade uses. And then this is something that's interesting, that a lot of furniture, when I worked as a hardwood lumber inspector, what was valuable was lumber like this. It was clear without any so-called defects, without any splits, or here's a small knot, or wormholes, anything that would be considered a defect. What you wanted was clear, straight-grained lumber, or And so this might have been the thing more popular years ago, but right now, what's really in is wood that has a lot of character. So these are 2 tables that my son makes. My son has a live edge furniture business. And so he has over 4,000 slabs drying that come from urban logs to be able to salvage the wood. And what he's looking for are wood that has lots of defect, which now we consider character, and makes a very beautiful table. Which table would you prefer? Those or that one?
The other one.
Yeah.
The second one.
And when I worked for a sawmill, this tree right here, that wood would have gone through the chipper. It wouldn't even be considered a value. It was considered trash or junk, and it was just ground up in the chips. And so we're changing the way that we think about wood, and now appreciating kind of natural so-called defects in the character of wood. So my cherry bedroom set made of wood I showed you, that's all clear veneer quality, top grade. But if I could do it over, I would do this. This is more reflective of life, taking our so-called defects, which give us character, and simply embracing that for life. And then you have to get wood from the material. Here's a kind of artistic representation of how wood lumber is evolved. And then here are different, if you're interested kind of in wood shop, typically most woods that you have, or you're working with a wood shop, are going to be plain sawn, but some of the funkiest woods, especially for whitewood, is what's quarter sawn, which is a more time-consuming and wasteful process, but gives us the highest quality of rift sawn, or live sawn, where you're just cutting a log like a loaf of bread. So depending how the log is sawn, you get different kind of woods. And that's it, folks.